Yo, what is up everybody, Joe the Great here, and welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we got yet another classic by the great Swagkage, and as you can tell by the title, this is the best fight in Naruto. So folks, as you guys may well know, the week prior we did the worst fight in Naruto by Swagkage. So what better video to do this week than the best fight in Naruto by the great Swagkage, right? So there are many illustrious fights within the Naruto timeline, right? Rock Lee versus Gaara, Naruto versus Sasuke in part 1 in the War Arc, Kakashi versus Obito, etc. There are many illustrious and legendary fights that the Naruto fandom greatly admires and reveres to this day. So I'm very intrigued to see what Swag's opinion will be on this, what his explanation will be, what his premise will be for his opinion, and I'm very intrigued to hear it. But before we begin, any less really appreciate, hit that like button, turn on bell notifications to stay updated with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy, man, you mess with the kid, make sure to hit that sub button, because once you do, become part of the family forever. But let's not waste any more time, screen. Let's see what Swag says today.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So last time I did this, I took a look at what I felt was the worst fight in Naruto. At least the worst major fight in Naruto. A lot of angry comments, where we're a little bit surprised that I didn't pick Sakura versus Ino, or like Team Guy versus their clones. I just think that Naruto versus Neji is the worst relative to its impact. But anyway, for the sake of balance, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about what I feel is the best fight in the series. And there are a lot of popular answers to this question. The four that immediately come to mind are Gaara versus Rock Lee, Naruto versus Pain, Kakashi versus Obito, and Naruto versus Sasuke. Now, I'm gonna surprise everybody again by saying that, in my opinion, the correct answer isn't any of these fights. It's Naruto versus Sasuke. Not this one though. The one from part 1.
Part 1.
I think I have a really solid case to present here. I do recognize that I'm kind of fighting an uphill battle. Maybe not. Maybe everybody actually agrees with me, and I just didn't know.
It's up there. It's a very good fight.
Fights that I mentioned are a lot more popular than this one. And even aside from these four, there are tons of other really good fights in Naruto. Anytime you say one of them is the best, you're saying that it's better than all of these other gems. But I really do feel that way about the first Naruto versus Sasuke fight that takes place in the Valley of the End. See, I also recognize that given the fact that Naruto and Sasuke have fought 2 other times, listening to me talk about this one specifically might be a bit confusing, especially because I'm going to be referencing both of these other fights at multiple points throughout the video. I guess I'll just do my best to make sure that this is as straightforward as possible and that nobody loses track of anything. I mean, you're smart, you'll be fine. Now moving on to the actual question at hand here. We've kind of skirted around it for almost 2 minutes now. Why do I think this fight is so good? Well, obviously there's a certain level of subjectivity involved in a discussion like this.
Of course.
Like, it's going to be at least somewhat opinion-based. But on the other hand, I think the same is true, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, but still, I think the same is true for what I hesitate to call objectivity, but something to that effect. Like, of course, I don't think anything about art is completely objective. To better illustrate my point, I kind of already proved it with what I said earlier at the beginning of the video. Generally, anyway, everyone agrees that the worst fight in Naruto is one of these 2, and generally, everyone agrees that the best fight in Naruto is one of these 4. But like I said earlier, there are a lot of fights in this series, and yet somehow everyone's kind of been able to narrow down the worst of them and the best of them into distinct groups of a small select few. So now the point that I've been building to is, since everyone tends to agree when a fight is exceptionally good or exceptionally bad, we can also all probably agree that there's some kind of special sauce, or maybe even some kind of palette of special sauces that when you're creating a fight, you can inject the fight with that sauce to make it really good, or you can extract that sauce out of the fight to make it really bad. Obviously, the analogy is kind of a simplification, but I think you get the idea. Like, there are a lot of things that you gotta understand, that you gotta nail when crafting a good fight, and one thing that I consider pretty important to a good, memorable fight, at least one that takes place at the climax of a story, is buildup. Buildup isn't always necessary for a fight to be good, but it tends to help out a lot. At the very least, if a fight is built up properly, just reaching the point where the fight takes place will be one of the most satisfying events in the entire story. Now, Naruto has managed to do this really well plenty of times aside from just this fight. Sasuke versus Itachi, when Madara first shows up, even the Naruto versus Sasuke fight at the end of Shippuden. Like, all of these are really good examples of this. Now, while I wouldn't go so far as to say that this fight has the best build-up, like out of any other fight in Naruto, it's definitely up there. It's one of the series' best examples of this, for sure. And one thing I find really cool is how its build-up is, like, kind of layered. Let me explain what I mean by that. This fight is kind of foreshadowed from, like, the very beginning of the series. Pretty much as soon as Naruto and Sasuke first run into each other and we see them interact, we get the sense that, okay, these two are gonna have some, like, rival showdown at some point in the future, right? This is the first layer, and the second layer comes in right at the beginning of the Sasuke retrieval arc, where Naruto and Sasuke have their actual first fight. See, at first, when Sasuke initially challenges Naruto, as a reader, it feels like you're finally gonna see all that build-up from before receive a payoff. But it should be apparent from the moment Kakashi appears that this isn't their real final showdown. The series had been running for long enough up to this point. There was just no way that this fight that had been teased and foreshadowed for this long was gonna end inconclusively. This is why I say the buildup is layered. Of course, each of Naruto's arcs has a major confrontation at the end that it sort of establishes at the beginning of the arc and builds towards from that moment until the confrontation finally happens. In the Land of Waves, it's Kakashi versus Zabuza, and maybe sorta Naruto versus Haku. In the Chunin exams, it's definitely Naruto versus Gaara, and the Tsunade arc builds towards the three-way deadlock that happens at the end. Now, Naruto versus Sasuke is slowly teased and foreshadowed in the background while all of this is happening. But it never goes anywhere until the beginning of the Sasuke retrieval arc, where it looks like we're gonna get that fight right from the beginning. Except this fight actually just exists to build up the real final fight, which is, of course, what this final arc builds toward. But this build-up is just a smaller part of the larger build-up towards this fight that spans the entire rest of the series. It's one of those things that, like right from the moment that you start the series, you're just waiting for it to happen. And when it finally does happen, when you finally have it in front of you, it feels almost surreal. It's one of the most satisfying things, like, ever. Like I said earlier, there are a handful of other fights that this applies to as well, particularly Sasuke versus Itachi. But one thing that I think most of the other fights in Naruto, especially all of the other ones that were built up as well as this one, lack is serious, honest tension. There's some pretty high stakes in this fight. If Naruto loses, Sasuke becomes a thrall of Orochimaru, and also Naruto might die, and up to this point, the arc has been
stakes were very high,
pretty
right?
depressing.
They were very high.
Like, Choji and Neji may be dead. So while you still expect Naruto to win, it's not, like, completely off the table that he might lose the fight. Granted, he's the main character, so his plot armor is a lot thicker.
It's always going to be there.
Than Neji's or Choji's. So, I mean, like, he'll probably win, right? Like, that's what you think, but of course he doesn't. And his loss doesn't come out of nowhere. It feels totally possible throughout the entire fight. I mean, it's just this constant back and forth. One moment Sasuke has the advantage, the next Naruto has the advantage, then it's back to Sasuke, then it's back to Naruto, then by the end they're both evenly matched, and it ends with this big Chidori Rasengan clash. It's never really clear who's going to win until the fight finally ends and you realize it was Sasuke. And now I don't want to give Naruto more credit than it deserves and act like this sort of thing is like revolutionary or anything. The hero losing a major battle. This sort of thing does happen pretty frequently depending on the fiction that you consume. But for a battle shonen like this, or for a lot of stories that include the hero's journey, it's rare for a character to fuck up this colossally. Like, to lose in a situation where their failure has consequences that are this devastating. Naruto's loss in this fight is massive. The ripple that it creates permeates throughout all of Shippuden. And again, I don't want to act like Naruto is the only series to have ever done something like this or anything. I know it's not, but I still think that it was really cool and unexpected. And like I said, it serves to enhance the fight by making things feel truly tense throughout it. Fights where it's completely possible for the hero to lose and the consequences of that loss are as catastrophic as these are so much more enthralling than fights where you know the outcome from the very beginning. I also really like the way this fight explores the relationship between Naruto and Sasuke, as despite how important it clearly is to the story, it's not something that's like directly addressed ever or really fleshed out the way it is through the dialogue they exchange in this fight. It also gives the reader a lot of insight into Naruto and Sasuke individually, not just as parts of this two-person friendship, which is something that I also really appreciate. Now, of course, there's one really obvious reason why I like this fight, and that's the action, the spectacle, the choreography, the actual fight itself. Man, So from this point forward, I'm probably completely throwing objectivity out the window. I just really like the way this fight looks, dude. It's so cool. Regardless of whether you're reading the manga or watching the anime, this is such a treat to look at. There's badass imagery all over the place.
It is very
Both
aesthetically
Naruto
pleasing,
and
I agree.
Sasuke throw out all
Yep, most
sorts
definitely.
of crazy cool looking attacks. And then there's that final scene, you know, the one where they both stand at the bases of the statues. Sasuke charges up the Chidori Lament, Naruto charges up the Vermilion Rasengan, and then they both just fly at each other. That's one of the most iconic shots in the whole series. I really don't think there's anything wrong with this fight. I could read it or watch it a million times and not get bored. It's super cool. There's a whole lot of narrative weight, satisfying payoff to a series-long build-up. It's really everything that you could ask for in a mid-series climax. I know tons of people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. Feel free to let me know what your favorite fight in Naruto is in the comments, and also let me know if you want me to do anything like this in the future, but with different series, of course. So like Dragon Ball, Hunter x Hunter, so on and so forth. Anyway, I think I've said everything I need to. So
Great video,
as
Swag,
always,
and
thanks
this is
for
a great
watching.
selection
Have a
for
good
best
day.
fight.
Take care.
It's a very good fight. Alright guys, there you guys have it. That is the video. I definitely want to give my 2 cents here. I think he made a solid selection for the best fight in Naruto. That is a very good fight. It has both the aesthetically pleasing aspect and the thematically significant aspect, right? Because what happened was monumental to the very anime itself. That would be the setup and the catalyst for Naruto Shippuden, right? With Naruto being defeated in battle, Sasuke went to Orochimaru, right? And became the villain of the story for quite some time. So by the time you're in Shippuden, the whole landscape is set up because of that very fight. Because obviously if Naruto were to be victorious, that whole setup would never be a thing, right? Sasuke would go back to the village. Orochimaru would never have Sasuke in his hands, and that would be the end all be all when it comes to that. So this was a very monumental fight. You could argue the most important and significant fight of the very show itself. It's definitely up there, right? So other fights that are up there in my opinion, right? Definitely Kakashi versus Obito and Naruto versus Sasuke in the War Arc. I think those are up there, right? As far as thematic aspects and aesthetic aspects, those in my opinion are up there with this fight. Rock Lee versus Gaara was very aesthetically pleasing, and also this is very hype. It was a very hype fight. Rock Lee got his moment to shine. The eight gates aspect was a very visually enticing, very intriguing, and the whole underdog storyline that was kind of embedded in that short interaction between the Gaara and Rock Lee was perfectly executed, right? He was a guy that was always doubted, right? And then he pulls out this amazing power and almost defeats the demon himself at the time, which was Gaara. He almost defeated him, right? Now Kakashi versus Obito does have the thematic aspects that you would really enjoy, right? Because there wasn't explosions and all these kinds of visual aspects to this fight. It was just very impactful, and it was a very significant moment at the time. Not overall, right, to the whole storyline, like Naruto versus Sasuke Part 1 or War Arc, Naruto versus Sasuke, right? It was significant, but not as much as those, in my opinion. Although Obito, of course, was a very pivotal figure in the entire storyline of Naruto, that interaction, in my opinion, wasn't the most impactful as far as how the storyline would lay out, right? But it was very impactful as far as from an emotional standpoint, right? I guarantee every viewer was emotionally invested in this moment, right? Kakashi, we thought, lost his friend, and the very pivotal villain himself happens to be the friend he once was affiliated with, Obito Uchiha. And what was very well done was this dichotomy that was set up between the present, which was when they were fighting in the Kami dimension, in the past, which shows them as Genin and Chunin and I believe Kakashi being a Jonin sparring, right? They were sparring, and this mirroring that took place was very well done. It made it much more impactful from an emotional standpoint, like I just said. So that fight is definitely up there. However, in my opinion, the best fight in Naruto history would most likely be Naruto versus Sasuke in the war arc. Here's why. All right. It is probably the most important fight, because if Naruto were to be defeated, the very shinobi world would have been affected. Sasuke would become this revolutionary, tyrannical leader that he wanted to become. He wanted to be the darkness that sets everything right. That was basically his whole goal. He wanted to be a revolutionary, right? And Naruto was the last hope of the shinobi world itself. He was the very last hope. So he had to win. The stakes were higher than they ever were in any fight previous, right? They were extremely high. The very fate of the world, you could say, was in the hands of Naruto. So he had to defeat Sasuke. And you could argue, aesthetically, it was extremely, extremely impressive. The animations, the moments, the dialogue, everything was extravagant. It was a beautiful thing to behold, to be honest. That fight, in my opinion, is the best. Thematically, they knocked it out of the park with that one, right? The stakes were so high. The moment was so intense. And that was the grandest stage of Naruto Shippuden, hence was the reason why it was the final battle. It was in the final valley. So a very fitting location for the biggest fight in Naruto, right? So in my opinion, that's the best fight in Naruto. Of course, it's all subjective. Some people prioritize aesthetics. Some people prioritize their characters. Some people mix both of them, right? So it really depends on what you prioritize and who you revere more, right? Kakashi, right? If you revere him, then you're going to pick Kakashi versus Obito. If you revere Rock Lee, you're going to pick Rock Lee versus Gaara. And if you are a Sasuke fan, probably one of his fights. Some honorable mentions that are up there, of course, Sasuke versus Itachi, Naruto versus Pain. Spectacular fight. The Pain arc is my very favorite arc of all time. That fight was spectacular, right? Pain made the moment so important and so impactful from an emotional standpoint. He made it very impactful, very significant to all viewers. And that was one of the most hype moments I've ever seen in anime history. Not just Naruto, but any point in any anime I've ever seen. It is up there with the greats, right? Fucking Goku versus Frieza, right? Fights like that. It's up there. It was spectacular. Spectacular. So there's been many, many illustrious fights throughout the Naruto timeline. However, of course, it is a subjective topic. It really depends, again, on what you prioritize. You know, the thematic aspects, the aesthetic aspects, which characters you revere more, which points hit you harder emotionally, right? I'm sure it varies from person to person. There are probably some universal commonalities amongst the Naruto fandom as to which moments impacted us more, like Jiraiya's death, Itachi versus Sasuke, etc. But, like I said, it is subjective, and that is why there are varying opinions within the Naruto fandom on what the best fight in Naruto history really is. But yeah, folks, I think that's going to wrap it up. This is always an interesting topic. Let me know what your favorite fight of all time is in the comments below. I'm always interested to hear your thoughts, and I do read them thoroughly. So if you're wondering, I do. So any comments are greatly appreciated. But that's going to wrap it up. If you have any other recommendations, please let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video. This is Jay signing out. Peace.